Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Agyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Mukam karoti vachanam bhangam langyate girim yakripatamam vande Shri Gurudina Taranam Paramanandam Madhavam. We ended our discussion on the eighth chapter last week, and as take home, the assignment was to prepare for speaking on the sections of the ninth chapter. One of the key chapters in Bhagavad Gita, called Most Confidential Knowledge. Before we do that, I'll do a quick recap of the eighth chapter, and then after that, see if you have any discussion and question answers on it. So, in the seventh chapter, Krishna begins to speak about himself. And so he begins to talk about who he is, how does he relate to the material world, the kind of people who look for him or accept him, the kind of people who reject him. And he ends the chapter glorifying those who take refuge in Krishna. So in the eighth chapter, he essentially talks about these people. And the eighth chapter is mostly about Yoga Mishra Bhaktas, and also Krishna speaks about pure devotion, devotional service. So the chapter begins with Arjuna asking 7 questions of Krishna. What is the Brahman, Adhatma, what is Karma, Adibutari, Deva, Adiyagya? And the 7th question is how to know you at the time of death. And Krishna quickly in 2 verses, he answers the first 6 questions. That the Jiva is Brahman, the Adhyatma is Swabhav, the eternal nature. Karma are those activities that result in the creation of a material body. And these 3 questions relate to the Jiva. Then Adibhuta is Krishna's external energy, which is matter. Adideva is the Vishwarup, the universal form of Krishna that is containing all the Devas. And Adiyagya is the Paramatma form of Krishna that is the benefactor of all the Yagyas. And then the 7th question, how to know you at the time of death, Krishna essentially spends the rest of the chapter speaking about this. And he speaks about it through 3 comparisons. Results of remembering Krishna and not remembering Krishna. The process of remembering Krishna, and he compares 2 processes, Yoga Mishra Bhakti and Bhakti. And the result of this, of actually remembering Krishna at the time of death. There again, he compares Yoga Mishra Bhaktas with Bhakti Yogas. And one thing that you would have noticed that in almost all the purports in this chapter, Srila Prabhupada emphasizes on the chanting of Hare Krishna. Because this is a doorway to bhakti. So in terms of how to remember you at the time of death, Krishna states the general principle. Famous word, yam yam vapi swaran bhavam tejati antakalevaram, that whatever state one remembers at the time of death, that state he attains. And then he says, the verse actually, the reverse order. He first gives a specific example that antakalecha mahameva swarana mukta kalevaram. So the person who thinks of me at the time of death attains my nature. And then the principle is, whatever you think at the time of death, you will attain that. So, following this, Krishna talks about the process of remembering him at the time of death. So he talks about the Sat Chakra yoga that is practiced by the Yoga Mishra Bhaktas, and how they elevate through the Shat Chakras, the 6 chakras, till it reaches the Kundalini chakra that is at the top of the head. And then at a favorable time of the day, at a favorable part of the year, at an auspicious time, they will leave their body. And Krishna also, he compares the destination of those who leave at a favorable time and those who do not leave at a favorable time. Right. So in the 14th verse, the famous verse that Anyacheta Satatam Yamam Smarati Metesa, that for those who remember me without devotion, I am easy to obtain. Right. He says, Tasyaham Sulabha Partha, Sulabha. That attaining me is very, very easy. And Sulabha is comparing the path of bhakti with that of the yogis, where they have to take care of so many things. Then in terms of destination, Krishna compares the material world with the spiritual world. Right? He calls the material world as Dukhalyam Ashashratam, that it is temporary and it is full of misery. And his own world, Mamupetya, he says it is never annihilated, it is permanent. Once you attain it, you never come back. And best of all is that Krishna is present there. So he's comparing the difficulty of, now even the Yoga Mishra Bhaktas are transcendentalists. But the process of Yoga Mishra Bhakta is difficult. And he gives 4 conditions: the time of the day, light, sun, moon, all have to be met. And then the destination is Brahman. And the process of bhakti is easy, and the destination is Vaikuntha or Golok. So it is much higher. So that's Krishna's conclusion at the end of the 8th chapter, that Vedeshu Yaggeshu Tapasu Chaiva Dhaneshu Yat Punya Phalam Pratisham Atyeti Tat Sarvam Idam Veditva Yogi Param Sthanam Upaiti Chadyam. That Vedeshu Yaggeshu Tapeshu. So one can, the study of the Vedas, the performance of Yagya, the performance of austerities, Dhaneshu Punya Phalam, giving and charity, all the auspicious things that one can do, the Natyeti Tat Sarvam Editva Yogi Param Sthanam Upiti Chadyam. But my devotee, he has already attained all that. He does not have to separately aspire for any of this. The study of the Vedas, the performance of sacrifices, performance of austerities, charity, philosophical, fruitive activities, all these are automatically subsumed by the process of bhakti, and the destination is Krishna's supreme eternal abode. And that would basically be the segue into the 9th chapter, which we discussed is kind of actually more of a continuation of the 7th chapter. We'll see that it is, or when you will present, you would have noted that its structure is similar to to the 7th chapter. So I'm going to pause over here and see that if you have any comments or discussions or any questions. Okay, Bhakti Vinod Prabhu.
Yeah, Hare Krishna Prabhu, in the verse 24, Krishna says that the people who attain that supreme by passing away from the world during the influence of the fiery god. So what is that fiery god here, Prabhu?
So Krishna essentially talks about the 4 things that are auspicious, and the fiery god is so he compares it with light, and Prabhupada explains this as an auspicious time. So there are certain times in the day that are auspicious, like the Brahma Muhurat time, as opposed to other times that are not. So it's a description of that which is auspicious time of the day as opposed to that which is not.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu.
Okay. Gayatri Mataji?
Hare Krishna. So I have questions towards this, terms, Adhibhuta, Adhidhaiva, and Adhiyagya. In chapter number 6, as I understood, at the end, when Krishna uses these words, he describes himself with these words. However, in chapter number 7, when he explains what those words mean, he kind of doesn't describe himself anymore with these words. Like, for example, in chapter number 6, he says, I'm above, right? I'm above the demigods. I'm above like all yagyas, or I'm the source of all yagyas. I'm the Adhibhuta, right? He's talking about himself as he's above everything. However, when we look at the verse 3 and 4, they mean different things already.
So, so the answer to your question is yes and no. Adibhuta, Adideva, and Adiyagya still describe Krishna in the 8th chapter. So Adibhuta is Krishna's material energy. Adideva is Krishna's universal form, and Adiyagya is Krishna as Paramatma. So they're still pointing to Krishna. I think the broader question is that does Adibhuta, Adideva, Adiyagya always point to Krishna? And the answer is no. That it could also point to the Jiva depending on the context. And but in this particular context, they are pointing to Krishna.
For example, also if we take the word Adhatma, it's from the verse 29, right? Over there, the word combination Adhatma karma, which means transcendental karma. And here Adhatma means the self. So how does these 2 words correlate between each other?
So in this sense, they do correlate, right? So Adhyatma is described as Svabhava, as one's own propensity to work. So the Jiva, based on one's Svabhav, performs a certain kind of activity. So once again, the answer to your question is, in this case, the continuity is maintained. In a broader context, these words are context-driven. They could point to Krishna, or they could point to Jiva, or they could point to something else. Because if you look at the construction of the word, Adi means that which is above, that which controls, that which supervises. So, and it qualifies the word that comes after that. So sometimes it could also point to the jiva, just like Purusha sometimes points to Krishna and sometimes points to jiva. But in this particular context, the continuity is maintained.
Mhm. And one last thing. So when we say, for example, when we were talking about the this person from chapter number 2, Sthitadhir Muni, that he is concentrated in the self, or that he is interested in the self, does it mean that he's interested in this Adhyatma, in the self? When we say that we
Which person are you talking about?
You know, when we learned chapter number 2, there was this word combination that someone is I don't remember exactly. I mean, the person, he is not interested in the whatever is outside, but he is kind of in the self.
He's sober, right? Like a sober. Sthitadhir is sober person.
No, not sober. He is in the self. He, you know, he's looking for his true self. So this self, is it this Adhyatma, or it's not related at all one to another?
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. So in the concluding part of the second chapter, there is a description of the person who is self-satisfied.
Yes.
Who is satisfied by the self, does not look for happiness outside. It's essentially a state of being. It's not really Adhatma, right? Because here Adhatma is defined as Swabhav. And the Acharyas here talk about Adhatma as the nature of the soul. So if you were to really look at what Adhatma in this context is referring to, it is referring to Jivere Swarup Hoye Krishna Nityadas, as the intrinsic nature of the soul to serve Krishna. The concluding part of the second chapter talks about a person who is detached. He may or may not be situated in his eternal position, but he's satisfied in the self, which means that he's materially detached. So two different things.
All right. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Ram Tulsi Mataji.
So the question I have, Prabhu, is Krishna says we have to practice Krishna consciousness and to remember him at the time of our passing. And Prabhupada tells us in the purports how to do it, chanting and always remembering Krishna, the 9 processes of devotional service. We can remember Krishna. So my question is, sometimes we see, devotees that have not practiced, but Krishna makes a really wonderful arrangement to leave this world. And even sometimes we see with the parents of devotees, sometimes they're very fortunate and they have not practiced Krishna consciousness, but Krishna makes a beautiful arrangement for them to leave this world. So how is that possible? Is that mercy or mercy of Krishna and Guru? What happens then?
The 9th chapter actually is the entire chapter is the answer to your question. The points that Krishna makes about his causeless mercy on the jiva, regardless of the qualification of the jiva, that's what makes it the most confidential, because Krishna is revealing his inner self here. He's saying that, look, guys, I'm partial. Don't think that I'm going to do everything by the rules. It's like you have a boss, and the boss comes and says that I really like yogurt. You start getting the person yogurt, and suddenly you're getting all the raises and promotions. So because now you know your boss's weakness. So Krishna is revealing his partiality to his devotees. So when Krishna is involved as a person, then most of the rules don't apply, because you're dealing with a person who has a personality.
Mhm.
Then we'll also make this point that Bhakti is preserved. So what we see here is the last. We don't see all the devotion that the person has done in the previous lives, all the mercy that the person has got. You probably know Srila Prabhupada's statement that he started off saying that 100% Krishna conscious, you go back to Godhead.
Mhm. Right.
And then he started coming down, and he came down to like, you probably remember that, something
I know.
like
Yeah.
70 some percent. And he said,
Right.
okay, at least that, but nothing less than that, right?
Right.
So why was he adjusting? The remaining percentage was his mercy. That was coming in. So that's what we understand, that when some devotees have stopped practicing, some devotees have not practiced perfectly, but we do not know how much mercy they have gained through their past activities.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one other question I have is Shanta Ras, the rasa of inanimate objects for Krishna? Is it like Krishna's flute? And is it the grass in Goloka Vrindavan? What is Shanta Ras?
Yes. So Salokya Mukti gets one access to Krishna's planet, but it's mostly in the mode of neutrality.
Okay.
So the cows, the peacock, the flute, Krishna's clothes, they have association of Krishna, but it's mostly passive association.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mataji.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Shaktiman Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Jai Prabhupada. Prabhu, this question is follow-up of Bhavati Prabhu's question regarding the fiery god. So I'm assuming it is sun god because the light comes from him. So can you please correct my understanding?
So it does say that from the so there are four things that is said, right? So the time of the day, whether it is light or dark, the position of the sun, and the position of the moon. So sun comes in the sense whether it's the Uttarayana or I'm not sure what the other 6 months, but when the sun is ascending in the sky or it's descending in the sky. Dakshayana, thank you. Right. So that's where the sun comes. Moon is simple. There are 2 weeks of waxing moon and 2 weeks of waning moon. And then there is the time of the day and whether it is light or not. And that's where my understanding is that it talks about the auspicious and the inauspicious time of the day. It's something that I can probably confirm to you since there are a few questions on this.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Okay, I'll make a note. Ajit Krishna Prabhu.
So, Prabhuji, quick question. Actually, this is kind of a follow-up to what Ramatulsi Mataji was asking, but kind of the flip side to that. And so we see that, so sometimes when a devotee is passing, we don't necessarily know what state of consciousness they are in, or if they're unconscious, if they're in a coma or something like that. We don't know what the medical situation might be. My hope is that despite the fact that the devotee may be unconscious or in a coma or something like that, they leave their body, but Krishna will still kind of give them credit for, having spent their life in devotional service. But I've also heard devotees say that, well, Krishna will somehow make an arrangement to force himself to your mind. But anyway, just wanted to ask you what your thoughts were on that.
So a disciple actually asked Prabhupada this very question, that people pass away in different circumstances. And Krishna said, if a devotee for some reason is not able to remember Krishna, then Krishna forcibly enters his mind. So Krishna makes sure that the devotee will remember.
Jai.
So the mercy factor is very, very strong in bhakti.
That's very inspiring for all devotees, So
yeah. It was reassuring.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. Okay. You have another question, or you forgot to, Gayatri Mataji, or you forgot to?
Yes, I just have one more question and one more doubt about the relationship of the verse 24 and 26. So the verse 24, it says that the one who knows the Supreme Brahman, he goes into Brahman and he leaves the body during the light, in the light. And then verse 26, they also say that those who pass in the light, they do not come back. However, there was also another discussion that those who go into Brahman, they like most of the times they fall down. So I see here little contradiction.
So your question is that
if you can just explain to me, so how so the question is, as I understand, Bhagavad Gita says that those who know Brahman, they go to Brahman, and Krishna says that those who pass in the light do not come back. However, there was previous discussion that those who go into Brahman definitely most likely fall down, like 99%. So I see just...
So I think you had, or maybe somebody had asked this question earlier on, and I think my answer would still be the same, that the fall from the Brahman is different from the fall from the heavenly planets. The fall from the heavenly planets is inevitable. It is forced. Like Punyakshina, that as when one's 5 credits are exhausted, then one falls. The fall from the Brahman is because of the desire of the jiva. There is no compulsion. Srila Prabhupada makes this point that because the jiva is anandamai, it is seeking happiness, so it comes down seeking that happiness that is absent in the Brahman, but it's the desire of the jiva. And Krishna makes the same point that one who attains my supreme abode never falls down. But we all have actually fallen from Krishna's supreme abode. Right? So there's a contradiction over there. Right? In the 9th chapter, Krishna will make this point that one who attains my abode never falls down. But all of us were originally there in the spiritual world and we fell down. So how do we resolve it? By the understanding that we were not pushed out. We desired to come down, and that's how we came down. Same thing applies to Brahman also.
Thank you for explanation.
Okay. Rajkumar Prabhu?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. So there are 4 conditions under which if somebody dies, they don't come back, and there are 4 conditions under which they die, they come back. So all those conditions should meet, or one of them? And second thing is that predetermined, or it happens accidentally based on the karma and bhakti they do in this birth, or is it predetermined? In that case, if it is predetermined, then nothing be done on that, right?
Right. So the understanding is that for those who are not following the path of bhakti, all the 4 conditions need to be met. So it is mentioned that even if one of the 4 conditions is not met, then that destination is not achieved. Right. So it's like an and condition as opposed to an or condition. And it is not predetermined. It is determined by the activities of the jiva. So one example that is given is that it's an analogy, but it helps to explain that if you have a calculator and then you're entering numbers in the calculator, 2 plus 4 minus 6 plus 7, and then you press is equal to and you get a result. So that's what the moment of death is, that throughout your life, you're pushing these numbers in the calculator, and at the time of death, you press equal to. And depending on how you have lived your life, the moment of death is determined. So it is predetermined because you have already lived your life by that time. But who was the person who determines it? It's you who determines it. It's not like a divine power that determines it for you.
So from the death of, by the way our relatives die, it is easier to know that they are coming back or not. If we see that like the I'm just giving personal example, when my mother died, all those 4 conditions which says that the person doesn't come back were met. So I can assume that she is liberated.
My answer to these questions is that the Bhagavad Gita talks about principles. There is always a gap between principles and practice, right? So, you read a book of medicine and there are so many principles that are given there. Now, will that help you diagnose every patient's illness? Will that help you give the cure for every patient? It's not going to happen. Right? Those are guiding principles. So that's how we should understand these philosophical statements.
Okay.
The point that Krishna is making over here is that determining the destination on the basis of your own strength is a slippery slope. It is difficult. It results in so many conditions happening. Vishwanath Chakravarti, in the commentary to this verse, he says that when Krishna speaks about these 4, Prabhupada also talks about it briefly, that when Krishna speaks about these 4 conditions, what he is saying is that the presiding deities of these 4 will actually carry the soul to the next destination, right? Whatever the next destination is. So that's one way of understanding. The general principle is that, yes, if a person has passed with these conditions, the destination is auspicious. How auspicious it is, whether it is Brahman or Vaikuntha or Golok Vrindavan or whatever, it is difficult for us to simply apply those principles and get that answer.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take one last question. Praveen Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandavat Pranam. Prabhuji, so Brahma Muhurat is during the Brahma Muhurat time, it is still dark. So if somebody passes in Brahma Muhurat, is that auspicious or inauspicious?
That's a very good question, and I don't have the answer to that. Nobody has asked that question before. It's a good question. I'll ask somebody else, because there seems to be an inherent contradiction, but I don't have the answer. I'll follow up with somebody else who knows more than I do and try and get an answer for you.
Okay, Prabhuji, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Very good. So we will now do our discussions on the 9th chapter. And so if each group can present their respective sections, we can start with group 1.
Hey, Krishna Prabhu. So this section is the first 10 verses, Krishna's relationship with the material world. So we saw in chapter 8, Krishna gave the information about how to attain him by becoming a devotee. But in this chapter 9, which is called the most confidential knowledge, Krishna will explain the process of becoming a devotee. So this chapter 9 is extending the things which have been presented in chapter 7, which is the knowledge of absolute. There is a very great similarity between chapter 7 and chapter 9, but chapter 9 is giving them in a deeper manner. So chapter 2 through 6 are called Guhya Gyan, because that was the knowledge about the matter and the spirit that was dealing with Atma Gyan and liberation, and it was the Guhya Gyan. Chapter 7 and 8 is the Guhyatar Gyan, is the more confidential knowledge. It was the knowledge of bhakti and how to attain Krishna at the time of death. It was about the Sambandha Gyan, relationship of the soul with Krishna. And this chapter 9 is about the knowledge of Kevala Bhakti, is Shuddha Bhakti, and is the most confidential, the Guhyatam. And it describes the majestic aspect of Krishna and the excellence of a pure devotee. It is the Abhidhe Gyan, how to act in your relationship, how to become a devotee. So in the first 3 verses, Krishna is explaining, glorifying the knowledge he's going to explain to Arjun. He says that this knowledge can be only given to people who are non-envious. Since Arjun is non-envious, is a friend of Krishna, is giving this knowledge of bhakti to him. Then Krishna speaks about that since this is the pure devotional knowledge, it has 8 characteristics, that it is the king of all education, is the king of all secrets, is the purest knowledge. And then Prabhupada describes that this knowledge of bhakti can be achieved through the 9 processes of devotional service, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Padasevanam, and all the other 9 processes of bhakti. In verses 4 through 10, Krishna speaks about the Aishwarya Gyan, about his relationship with the material world and how he sustained this material world. So this verses also describes about the Achintya, Bheda Bheda Tattva, inconceivable, simultaneous oneness and difference. So he says that in Krishna, in these verses, he says that he is in everything in unmanifested form, and all the living beings are in him. And because he's entering everything as Paramatma, and he's supporting the entire universe. And all the living beings are in him because he's the source of everything, and their existence is dependent on him. But then later he again contradicts himself, saying that he's not in everything, although he maintains everything because he's the Bhutaprita. Because he's saying that he's not in everything because he is there, he's aloof, he's enjoying his pastimes in Golok Vrindavan. So he's saying that he's not directly concerned with the maintenance of this universe, and his inconceivable energies are maintaining the universe while he is in his own abode Golok Vrindavan. So just as like the wind is blowing everywhere in the sky is supporting it, but they're 2 different things, the wind and the sky. So same thing, he's supporting the entire universe. And just because this is Achintya Bheda Bhed, we typically give the example of we are like the Jiva is like a drop of ocean, and Krishna is the ocean. Our qualities are the same, but quantity-wise, we are Anu and he is Vibhu. He's here describing the Achintya Bheda Bheda terms in terms of the material world. And then in the verses 7 through 8, he's talking about the creation and the destruction of the material world by his energies. So at the time of destruction, all the living annihilation, all the living entities enter into him, into Mahavishnu. And again, he starts the creation again through the Sarga. So then even though he's creating and destroying and this is going on, he's neutral, like as a high court judge. Like the high court judge is rewarding somebody, he is punishing somebody, but he's detached. Similarly, Krishna is detached because he is Atmara and he's no bondage for him. So through this Purusha avatars, he's producing all moving and non-moving beings. That was all, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. I think this is one of the more philosophically dense part of the chapter, and as you rightly pointed out, it's speaking about Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, which is the foundation of Gaudiya Vaishnavism philosophy, at least. So thank you for presenting that so nicely. Hare Krishna. Moving on, group 2.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I'm visiting group 2. So we have given the verses 9:11 to 9:17.
Can't hear you, Prabhu.
Can you hear me now, Prabhu? Hare Krishna. Yeah, sorry about that. So I'm representing group 2. We were given the verses 9:11 to 9:17. So from the verses 9:11 to 9:15, this section mostly it compares the Mudas and the Mahatmas. In 9:11 to 9:12, Krishna talks about the fools, and in the purports, Srila Prabhupada mentions who is a Muda. One who does not know the confidential activities and different energies of Krishna, and his body is a symbol of complete knowledge and bliss, and he is appropriate of everything, and he can award liberation to anyone. He is called a Muda. So they deride Krishna and consider him to be a human being. They make great offenses by considering Krishna to be an ordinary human being and are deluded and cannot understand the eternal form of Krishna. In the verses 9:13 to 9:14, Krishna speaks about the Mahatma. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada gives the signs of a Mahatma. The first sign of a Mahatma is he's already situated in divine energy and not under the control of material energy. And what is that divine energy? So a Mahatma is put under the guidance of spiritual master, which is who is a Daivi Prakriti, which is called as divine nature. So a Mahatma does not divert his attention to anything outside Krishna, because he knows perfectly well that Krishna is the original supreme person, that the cause of all causes. He is not attracted. Mahatma is not attracted by Krishna's other features such as Mahavishnu, but he is simply attracted by two-found form of Vishnu. They are not concerned with any form of demigod or of a human being. A Mahatma is always engaged in chanting the glories of Supreme Lord, praising his holy name, his form, and they observe the rules and regulations such as fasting on Ekadashi and appearance day of the Lord. 9:15 is a summary of both the verses 9:11 to 9:14, and in purport Srila Prabhupada, going back to chapter 7, where we have different classes of men, the Mahatmas, the other persons who worship Krishna, the lower class of men, and the lowest among all, those who worship themselves to be Supreme Lord. And verses 9:16 to 17, again Krishna speaks about himself, that he's the ritual, the sacrifice, the offering to ancestors, the helping herb, the healing herb, the transcendental chant, etc. That's it, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, you're muted. Bhayahari Prabhu.
Sorry, my apologies. Thank you, Shaktiman Prabhu. Well done. Let's move on to group 3.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. I am representing group 3. Our topic is Seeing Krishna, slogas 18 to 25. Sloga 18 states, Krishna created all planets, Chandra, Surya, Indra, Maharloka. They are all simultaneously Krishna. Everything is resting on Krishna's energy. Without Krishna's shelter, nothing can exist. Krishna is the supreme ruler. Everything exists in his energy. He is the ultimate goal of shelter. Krishna is the supreme father and friend. He is the eternal cause of all causes. Sloka 19 says, through his different energies, diffuses heat, light, and he gives rain. He is the energy of the person. He is both matter and spirit. The gigantic universal form compressing all material manifestations is Krishna. And Sloka 20 states, Vedas is Krishna himself. Sloka 22, worshipping Krishna with extreme devotion, meditation on his transcendental form, Krishna promises that I carry what they lack, I preserve what they have. Engage in devotional service by hearing chanting, remembering, offering prayers, worshipping, serving the lotus feet of the Lord, rendering services, surrendering fully to the Lord. Such devotee approaches the Supreme Lord without difficulty. Devotees of other gods and who also worship them with faith also worship Krishna indirectly. Krishna is the only enjoyer and master of all sacrifices. Those who do not follow will fall down to material existence. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. And the last section, group 4.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. So I'm presenting text 27 to 35. Krishna says, if one offers me with love and devotion a leaf, flower, fruit, or water, I will accept it. No need to follow any complicated rituals in the scriptures. Simply by offering what Krishna has asked, he will accept it. Krishna does not need anything, just our love. Srila Prabhupada says, even the poorest man can serve Krishna. When we do everything in connection to Krishna, it revives our Krishna consciousness. Krishna is not in need of anything. He is fully complete. He is unlimited, the maintainer of everyone. The offerings are for our benefit so that we can revive our Krishna consciousness and become freed from all results of all actions, auspicious and inauspicious, free from bondage. Krishna says, if you fix your mind upon me, you would become liberated. You will come to me. Krishna envies no one, nor is he partial to anyone. He is equal to all. But whomever renders service in devotion, such a person, a devotee, is a friend. Even if a devotee commits the most abominable act, he should still be considered saintly because he is constantly engaged and fixed in his determination. Krishna says, "Declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes." Anyone who takes shelter of Krishna, even the lowest born, can attain perfection by going to Krishna's abode and never take birth again. Krishna tells Arjun, "Engage in my loving service, constantly thinking of me, surely you will come to me." We don't belong to this world, we belong to Krishna's abode. The highest perfection is to elevate oneself to Krishna's abode. Pure devotional service is rare, but by coming into contact with a pure devotee, one can receive guidance and perfect himself in this lifetime. Pure devotional service includes always thinking of Krishna, constantly chanting the Maha Mantra, worshiping Krishna, offering our respectful obeisances unto him. When we engage in pure devotional service, we can become completely absorbed in Krishna consciousness and eventually return to Krishna. That is the highest perfection to achieve. Haribol.
Haribol, thank you so much. So thank you everyone for summarizing and presenting so nicely. So I do want to acknowledge the fact that that you're staying cognizant of time and also summarizing so nicely. My recommendation would be to take a little bit of a step back and try and get the rhythm of the section. Try and get the why part of it. Why is this verse over there? Why is Krishna saying this? How does it connect? So one of the things that is important from the Bhakti Shastri aspect is basically seeing the micro and the macro. Srila Prabhupada gives an explanation on the verses, and he expands on what is being spoken in the verse. If you study Bhurijan Prabhu's book, he tends to focus more on the trends. Why is this verse over here? And what is it? What is the general message that Krishna is trying to give? And if you're able to marry the two, then we have a good understanding of both. That what is the import of this verse? What is the purport of this verse? So, like I said, I'm very, very happy with the way the presentations are being done, and giving you this general feedback as a way to continue to improve. So we have 10 minutes left. I will not be able to finish the overview of the 9th chapter, but I will start, and then I will resume next week, and then next week we should then proceed on to the 10th chapter. Okay, so chapter 9, the most confidential knowledge, and Krishna puts this right in the middle of the Bhagavad Gita. So just like the section of Bhakti is in the middle section of the Gita, the chapter 9 is right in the middle. 18 chapters right in the middle. It's protecting that which is most exquisite. Prabhupada will give the example of the shells protecting a pearl, or the king is protected by the army in front and behind. So Krishna presents this right in the middle of the chapter. Now, question to you is that if this is the most confidential, Param Guhya, most confidential knowledge, why is Krishna openly speaking it out? Right. So, for those of you who have received the Gayatri Mantra, so you know that it's not spoken out. your guru speaks it in your ear because it's confidential. Why doesn't Krishna speak the 9th chapter in the ear of Arjuna? Why does he speak it out publicly and then calls it the most confidential knowledge? How do we reconcile that? Anantacharya, Prabhu?
So, Prabhu, Hare Krishna, my take is someone who's listening to this message up to the 8th chapter end, who gets the adhika to understand this 9th chapter.
Okay, thank you. Gayatri Mataji?
I think Krishna speaks, I tell this knowledge to Arjuna because at the end of the 9th chapter, he also says that this knowledge can be not only just for the Brahmins, but also for women and Shudras and other people who are not so advanced in spiritual knowledge. However, it is still confidential because most of the people are jealous of Krishna, and just listening to this knowledge doesn't mean that they will understand or live according to it.
Very good. So that's the right answer. That the knowledge is presented openly, but it cannot be received by everyone. Right at the very first verse, Krishna makes this point. In the first 3 verses, he talks about the qualification, right? And what's the qualification that Krishna gives? He says that the person who is anusuyeva, who is non-envious of me, that person can receive it. So it's like I have confidential knowledge. I write it in a script that only very few people can understand, and then I publish it openly. So it is there for everybody, but there are only very few people who can understand that script. So the confidentiality is maintained. So going back to the original point I was making, that Bhagavad Gita, it forces us to think in this way, because Prabhupada would say that it's the undergraduate of philosophy. Now, that doesn't mean that it is like we think of our undergraduate, that we studied something in undergraduate, something more in graduate. It is undergraduate because it is the building block of one's philosophical understanding. That once you understand Bhagavad Gita, you can understand any religion of the world. You can sit in, whether it is Christianity or Islam, or if you can, you sit in any of the variant religions, even of Vaishnavism or Hinduism, with the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, you can understand that. Okay, this person is saying this relates to Krishna saying this and this in this chapter. So Bhagavad Gita is providing us the building blocks. Now Krishna, using their building blocks, he constructs a house of devotion where he wants us to live. But there are other building blocks also that Krishna provides, that we can see how other people have constructed their own houses. Radhanath Maharaj, in one of his lectures, he says that to read and study the scriptures, one needs to be pious, good karma. He says one should have good karma to be able to read and study to read the scriptures. But then he says that in order to realize and live the scriptures, one needs mercy and blessings of the Vaishnavas. That's where the access to the confidentiality is prominent. That not many people will read the Bhagavad Gita, but those who are pious will read it. But in order to study it like we are studying it, and in order to realize it, which is understanding that what are the imports and purports, And in order to live it, there used to be a course called Living the Gita. And so in order to live it, one needs mercy of Guru and blessings of the Vaishnavas. So Chanakya Pandit says that one should perform one's austerities alone. So you don't see, like in the 6th chapter, the life of the ascetic is that of solitude. Right? You don't see them like together performing asceticism. They are all by themselves. So austerity one needs to do alone. Then he says, Kirtan, small groups. He says groups of 3, small groups. We have bigger groups, but he said at least groups of 3. He says travel in groups of 4s. I don't know where the 4 comes from, but he says travel in groups of 4. But he says study the scriptures in the association of like-minded people. Because study is not just knowing the verses. Study is like the questions that were asked today. What Ram Tulsi Mataji was asking about question of mercy, and other devotees were asking questions about qualifications at the time of death. So that comes as a result of the collective realization of the groups. And that is what is protecting the confidentiality of the 9th chapter. And that is also giving access to the 9th chapter. So Gaur Govind Maharaj gives this nice example that if you go with a bucket to get water from a well, and you try to extract water from it, the amount of water that you will get in the bucket depends on how much sediment is there in the bucket. If the bucket is full of sediment, mud, then no water. If the bucket is empty, there is lots of water. So the more we approach the study of the Bhagavad Gita with preconceived notions, the less we will get out of it. The more we approach Gita with a prayerful mode, with an accepting mode, the more we will get out of it. So we are in the middle of the Bhagavad Gita, and you might say that this is 9 chapters too late, but it's not 9 chapters too late. Prabhupada talks about in the introduction. This is a reinforcement. So in as was spoken by the first group, that there is a building of the confidentiality of the information that Krishna is giving us. Like Krishna first works about the confidential knowledge, which is knowledge about the soul. Like Krishna introduces Arjuna to himself, that you are the soul. What is the nature of the soul? How to realize the nature of the soul, Atma Gyan, right? That's the focus of chapters 2 to 6. That is confidential knowledge. 7 and 8, Krishna begins to speak about himself. He speaks about bhakti. That is more confidential knowledge. In the 9th chapter, Krishna will now talk about pure devotional service. It is most confidential knowledge. The Acharyas say it is most confidential because when one has this knowledge, one can control Krishna. So that is why Krishna protects this knowledge, because Krishna is revealing his inner emotions. Only in 2 places in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna does that. He does that in the 9th chapter, and he does that in the 18th chapter. Right? Otherwise, Krishna keeps his emotions guarded. But here we will see Krishna showing himself as a person with favoritism, thoughts, partiality. So far, Krishna has been boasting about how he's impartial and he's the same to everyone. And as one approaches him, he reciprocates. So he's talking about how he's perfectly in control. Now he talks about how he loses control. right? So that's what makes this chapter so confidential. Okay, so a bit of setting of the scene. 9th chapter is actually my favorite chapter, so I'm going to take a little bit of time speaking about it. There's so many wonderful verses in this chapter, so many verses reassuring devotees, reassuring Krishna's protection. So I'll speak more about it in the next. If you can read the 10th chapter and specifically read, pay attention to verses from 10.8 to 10.12. I'm sorry, 10.11. So these 4 verses are called the Chatushloki Gita, which carry in them the essence of the Gita. Right? So if you can pay attention to that, most of the 10th chapter they're just opulences. You can just read to them, but these 4 verses, they carry the essence of the chapter. Okay, so we will stop here and continue the discussion on the 9th chapter next week. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anantakoti Vaishnavinda ki jai.
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Jai Gaur Premanand.
Very good.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
Hari Prabhu ki jai.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you, devotees. Haribol.
Thank you.
This is not allowing me to end.